What if the deepest mysteries we fear are not just beneath the earth, but reflections of what we refuse to face within ourselves? We like to believe that science has illuminated the unknown, that the darkness has been mapped, categorized, understood, but beneath our feet, far from sunlight, far from certainty, there are worlds that defy not just explanation, but our very sense of reality. In places untouched for millions of years, life has evolved without light, without oxygen, thriving in conditions we would call impossible. Creatures that shouldn't exist, symbols that resemble language before language, movements in the dark that suggest something watching, waiting, and perhaps the most unsettling question is not what we are discovering, but why it feels so familiar. Because when we descend into these caves, we are not just exploring the earth. We are confronting the unknown parts of ourselves, the parts we've buried, ignored, or feared to understand. We are not afraid of the dark because it hides monsters. We are afraid because it removes the illusion of control. For centuries, human beings have walked the surface of this planet, believing that what is seen is what exists, that what is measured is what is real. But history quietly tells a different story. Again and again, when we have dared to go deeper, into caves, into oceans, into the hidden veins of the earth, we have encountered things that challenge not only science, but the very structure of our thinking. There is something ancient in that fear. Long before modern civilization, early humans painted warnings on cave walls, not just as records, but as messages, symbols that repeat across continents, across cultures that never met, patterns that seem less like art and more like memory. It raises a question that unsettles the mind. Were they documenting something they saw or something they experienced? In the sealed darkness of places untouched for millions of years, life exists in forms that ignore everything we thought we understood about survival. Creatures that breathe what we consider poison, organisms that react to presence without eyes to see. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that nature does not need to follow the rules we created to explain it. And yet, what disturbs us most is not the discovery itself, but the feeling it leaves behind. That quiet sense that we are intruding. That some of these places were never meant to be found, not because they are physically inaccessible, but because they reveal something about existence that we are not ready to accept. Throughout history, explorers have described the same unshakable sensation deep underground, a presence that cannot be explained, a movement just beyond the edge of perception, not seen clearly enough to confirm, but felt deeply enough to never forget. And as we continue to push further into these hidden worlds, mapping what was once unknown, documenting what was once myth, one question continues to echo in the silence beneath the earth. If the darkness was never empty to begin with, then what exactly have we been walking on all this time? We have always believed that life follows rules, clear, structured, dependable laws that define where it can exist and how it must survive. Oxygen, sunlight, water. These became the pillars of biology, the conditions we assumed were non-negotiable. And for a long time, that belief gave us comfort. It made the universe feel predictable, almost safe. But history has a way of quietly dismantling certainty. Deep beneath the surface, in places like Movile Cave, scientists uncovered something that should not exist. A sealed ecosystem, cut off from the outside world for over 5 million years. No sunlight, almost no oxygen. Air thick with toxic gases that would suffocate most known life within minutes. And yet, inside this isolation, life did not just survive. It adapted in ways that defy everything we thought we knew. Creatures there do not rely on photosynthesis, because there is no light to capture. Instead, they feed on chemical reactions, drawing energy from substances we would consider lethal. Entire food chains exist in darkness, built not on the sun, but on poison. It is not just unusual, it is a complete rewriting of the rules. And Movile is not alone. Across the world, in deep caves and hidden fractures of the earth, similar anomalies have appeared. Organisms that glow without purpose, react without sight, move without sound. Not remnants of ancient systems, but thriving, evolving entities that exist in environments we once labeled as impossible for life. What becomes unsettling is not just their existence, but what it implies. If life can emerge and sustain itself in conditions so extreme, then the boundaries we believed were fixed are not boundaries at all. They are assumptions. And assumptions, history shows us, are often fragile. For centuries, we defined life based on what we could observe on the surface. But beneath that surface, untouched and unseen, something else has been unfolding. A parallel version of existence, one that does not need our rules to function. And as more of these discoveries come to light, the question begins to shift. It is no longer about how these organisms survive, but whether our understanding of life was ever complete to begin with, and if it wasn't, then what else might already be living just outside the limits of what we believe is possible? There is something deeply unsettling about symbols that appear before their time. Throughout human history, writing has been seen as a defining moment. The point where thought became permanent, where memory could outlive the mind. We trace its origins carefully, linking it to early civilizations, to the slow evolution of language into something structured and readable. But what happens when markings are found that do not fit into that timeline, when symbols appear in places where no written language should exist? Deep within caves, far removed from sunlight and human settlement, explorers have uncovered engravings that feel deliberate patterns carved with intention, repeated shapes that resemble a system rather than random art. In places like Nigel Cave, these markings challenge more than archaeology. They challenge the sequence of history itself. Some of the symbols resemble early scripts, yet they predate known writing systems. Others depict figures that feel almost mythological, a horned entity standing in a posture that suggests meaning, not decoration. It is not the image alone that disturbs, but the precision. The lines are not chaotic, they are placed, considered, as if whoever created them was trying to communicate something or record something they had witnessed. What makes this even more difficult to understand is the location. These caves are not easily accessible. They require effort, navigation, and intent to reach. Which raises an uncomfortable question: why go so deep into darkness just to leave a message?
And perhaps more importantly,
who was meant to find it? Across different continents, similar patterns have been discovered, symbols that echo each other without any known connection between the cultures that created them. No shared language, no contact, no exchange, and yet the resemblance remains. It suggests either a coincidence too precise to accept, or a shared origin that has been lost to time. For centuries, historians have tried to organize the past into a linear story, one where knowledge progresses step by step, where each development builds logically on the last. But these discoveries disrupt that narrative. They introduce the possibility that something existed before our recorded understanding, something capable of expression, of symbolism, perhaps even of communication. And as researchers attempt to decode these markings, to assign them meaning, to fit them into a framework that makes sense, one possibility lingers in the background, quiet, but persistent, that these symbols were never meant to be understood by us at all, and whatever they were meant for may still be waiting in the dark where they were first placed. For most of human history, we have understood evolution as a response to the world above us, a process shaped by sunlight, climate, predators, and time. It is a system we believe we understand because we can observe it, measure it, and trace its patterns across generations. But beneath the surface, in complete isolation, evolution has been unfolding in ways that feel almost detached from the reality we know. In the vast chambers of Hang Serendong, where sections of the cave remain untouched and sealed from the outside world, something unusual was discovered. An organism that emits a faint blue glow in response to human presence. Not constant light, not random flickering, but a reaction, a response to something it should not recognize. Because in total darkness, over thousands, perhaps millions of years, sight becomes unnecessary. Eyes lose their function. Sensory systems adapt to vibration, to chemical signals, to subtle shifts in the environment. Evolution, in isolation, simplifies what is not needed and enhances what is not needed and enhances what is. So the question begins to form. Why would an organism develop the ability to glow in response to something it has never encountered before? It suggests anticipation or memory, neither of which should exist in a system that has been completely cut off from the outside world. This is where the discomfort deepens, because isolated ecosystems are not just different, they are self-contained experiments of nature, running without interruption, without influence, and what they produce should reflect only their environment, nothing more. Yet, time and again we find traits that seem unnecessary, behaviors that appear almost reactive to something beyond their closed world. Across various caves, similar anomalies have been observed. Creatures that freeze at the presence of footsteps they could not have evolved to recognize, movements that suggest awareness beyond simple instinct. It begins to challenge the idea that evolution is purely reactive, purely dependent on direct experience. And if that is the case, then what is guiding these changes in the dark? Because evolution in isolation should lead to simplicity, to efficiency. But instead, in some of these hidden places, it has led to complexity that feels almost intentional. As if something in that darkness is not just surviving, but adapting to something it has not yet encountered. There is a particular kind of fear that does not come from what we see, but from the quiet certainty that something else is aware of us. It is a feeling that has followed explorers for centuries, written in journals, whispered in accounts that were often dismissed as imagination shaped by darkness. But when the same sensation appears again and again, in different places, across different times, it begins to feel less like fear and more like a pattern. Deep beneath the earth, in places where light has never reached, the human mind begins to change. Without visual reference, without the familiar structure of the world above, perception sharpens in other ways. Every sound becomes amplified, every movement carries weight, and in that heightened awareness, many have described the same unexplainable experience, the sense that they are no longer alone. In the depths of Krubera Cave, one of the deepest known caves on Earth, an expedition captured something unusual. At nearly 1.5 kilometers below the surface, a camera recorded a shape moving quickly beyond the range of clear visibility. It was not defined enough to identify, not stable enough to study. But it was there, large, fast, and gone before it could be understood. What unsettled researchers was not just the movement itself, but the context. At such depths, life becomes scarce, fragile, limited to the simplest forms. The idea of something large navigating that environment should not align with what we know about survival in extreme conditions. And yet the footage exists. Brief, unclear, but impossible to ignore. Similar accounts have emerged from other deep cave systems. Explorers reporting footsteps that do not match their own, equipment shifting slightly when no one is near, shadows that seem to move independently of any light source. These are not dramatic events. They are subtle, almost easy to dismiss. But they leave behind a lingering certainty that something is just out of reach of perception. And this is where the fear begins to take shape, not as panic, but as awareness. Because the deeper we go, the more we assume that we are the ones observing, studying, documenting. We believe that we are the presence in these forgotten spaces. But what if that assumption is incomplete? What if, in some of these places, we are not the ones discovering, but the ones being noticed? For as long as we have recorded history, there has been a quiet confidence in our ability to understand the world. Every mystery, no matter how complex, was seen as temporary, something that could eventually be explained, categorized, and placed within the boundaries of human knowledge. Science became our language of certainty, a way to turn the unknown into something familiar. But there are moments, rare, unsettling moments, when that certainty begins to fracture. In the frozen regions of Alaska, preserved beneath layers of permafrost, discoveries have been made that do not fit into any known evolutionary path. Skeletal remains of creatures that appear structured for movement and coordination, beyond simple instinct. Limbs shaped in ways that suggest manipulation. Marks that resemble the controlled use of tools. Even signs that point toward the use of fire. These are not human remains. They do not align with any known primate species. And yet, the implications of their structure suggest behavior that should belong only to beings with a certain level of awareness we have long believed to be uniquely ours. This is where the limits of understanding begin to reveal themselves, because when evidence does not fit into existing frameworks, It is often set aside, labeled as anomaly, or left unexplained until more data can provide clarity. But what happens when the clarity never comes? When the fragments remain incomplete, resistant to every attempt at explanation? Throughout history, there have been discoveries that challenge the timeline of intelligence, the origin of behavior, the very definition of what it means to be conscious. And often, they are quietly absorbed into obscurity, not because they are insignificant, but because they do not belong anywhere we are prepared to place them. It raises a possibility that is difficult to confront, that our understanding of intelligence, of evolution, of existence itself, may not be as complete as we believe. That there may have been forms of life, forms of awareness, that emerged and disappeared without leaving behind a narrative we can follow. And if that is true, then the story we tell ourselves about being the first, the only, the most advanced, begins to lose its certainty. Because somewhere in the gaps of history, in the places where evidence becomes unclear and explanations fall apart, there is a silence that remains unanswered.